Jason Spangler and Matthew Delk. We're here at the whole video series, Cloth Talk 2.0. If you go back on my YouTube channel, you'll see that this was a series I started up almost a decade ago, maybe with Hank Birdsong, and we did some episodes kind of focusing on Carolina OA. You can go back and check those videos out. I have a playlist for those. But in talking to Matt, I wanted to maybe bring this idea back because Matt was one of the people who really influenced me back when I was in college to start collecting patches and memorabilia from the different lodges. And so today what we want to do is focus on Unilee Lodge. This is a lodge that has actually been covered in some previous videos. Back in episode 4 of Cloth Talk 2.0, Hank actually talked about the J. Rucker Newberry flaps. And then in a video series that Larry Lane has been doing, Doc Souther did a talk about Native American, like Indian Affairs patches from Unilee Lodge. But Matt and I sort of came up with a different idea. I give Matt all the credit for this. So I'm going to let him kind of tell you a little bit about his idea for this video. And then he also is going to kind of introduce some of the background information about Unilee Lodge and kind of launch us in there. So Matt, thanks for joining on this video.
Thanks for having me, and hello to everybody out there in internet land. I think the concept of what we wanted to talk about today were items that you don't commonly see in collections that are related to Unilee and its history. And Unilee's got a deep history in the low country of South Carolina. So these are all the items we have today. We decided just to include ones that we actually have and can show you a good scan of. And these are all items you would love to have in your collection. They all look great in a collection, and they're all some of them are a little bit off the beaten path to find. But if you do find these, certainly take the chance to get them. Jason, Unilee Lodge started in the early 1940s at Camp Ononwa in Low Country, South Carolina. And the driving force behind the creation of the lodge was the new scout executive there at the time, which was J. Rucker Newberry. A lot of people knew about Mr. Newberry, although he's passed on many years. He was important. He founded and worked with early OA lodges in places like, I think, Texarkana and Tonkawa Lodge. I think he was involved with them, if I'm not mistaken. And he came to South Carolina in the early 1940s and helped found Unilee Lodge. I think he was also had a hand in founding Bob White Lodge. But one thing that's unique that you don't really think about is the choice of a white-tailed deer. Now, I know in South Carolina now, and in many places of the South, the white-tailed deer is very plentiful and almost considered a pest in some areas. But it wasn't always that way. In the early 1940s, white-tailed deer in South Carolina were not populous throughout the entire state. I'll give you an example. I think a child who was in scouting, maybe inland in the Coastal Carolina Council, a place like, say, Dorchester County, St. George, somewhere like that, probably would not really see deer even if they lived on a farm in the 1940s. At the time, white-tailed deer were only in small pockets, really down on some of the low country sea islands and a few other of the swampy and more remote areas. And the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources partnered with a lot of other agencies with that and other species and repopulating them really through the Southeast, and very successful story. Anyway, the point is that if you were a scout and you were at Camp Ononwa in the 1940s, it would be a treat if you got to see a deer or jumped a deer or saw one early morning near your campsite. It'd be something you'd go home and tell your parents about. So it's no mystery to me that the white-tailed deer was chosen as the lodge's totem, and why. It was something special to Camp Ononwa and other low country areas. But why don't you talk about the chenille, because I don't have one to show. I'm still looking for one, hint, hint. So.
Yeah, so one of the things that we want to do in this video is, I think you've described it, Matt, as a BOLO video, which people have ever seen this idea. It's like, be on the lookout for. And so we wanted to show some memorabilia that is kind of special to Unilee. Now, the chenille, which we're going to start with first, is something very well known. It's probably one of the top 5 items in South Carolina that would be hard for collectors to get. But some of the other items we're going to show are things that maybe you've never even seen before. I know certainly the items you've selected, Matt, are not even in the Blue Book. They're not well documented. Maybe some of the old timers in Unilee Lodge know about them, but maybe some other folks don't. So that's going to be kind of fun today to show people some new things that they haven't seen. But we'll start with this chenille. So I'll kind of hold this guy up. So the chenille, we think, as far as we know, was probably early 1950s. And one of the things about this chenille is that it was issued in very limited numbers. Now, the one that I have, as you can kind of tell in this picture, is a little faded, or I guess I should say some of the colors have bled. And actually, in my example, I've got a little bit of maybe moth damage around the edge. But when you have something that is kind of a holy grail piece for a South Carolina OA collector, condition really doesn't matter. I'll just show you the back just so you can kind of see sort of the makeup of it. But, chenilles in the 1950s for OA patches are not that common. Not many lodges, especially, I know in South Carolina, nobody else did one, but they weren't that common. So don't really have an idea, Matt, you might, of how many of these were made, but I can tell you in collections today that, you could go 10, 20 years without ever having the opportunity to see one of these available for sale. It's really a killer piece.
Yeah, I'm still looking for one myself. And it may not be as rare as some of the items we're talking about, but it has a national demand for it. So you won't typically find one laying at a tradery with someone asking $10 for it. No, it would be a very expensive item to acquire. But there is an item that does come up and is rare, if not rarer than the chenille, and is very difficult to acquire, but it doesn't require the same amount of money to buy it as the chenille, but you may have to be patient to get one. And that's the N1. The N1 came out, we believe, around the same time as the chenille. Mine here is folded just a little bit funny, and it has the design of the A1 patch on it with Charleston SC at the top, and the patch is outlined in the green border. So it essentially is the A1 design. Now, the trick to this is finding one in good condition. The silk screen process used by the manufacturer on this item, it faded after just a couple of washings. So people typically got Lodge neckerchiefs back then to wear, not so much to keep in collections and keep in mint condition. So it is pretty challenging to find one. It took me a long time to find one in good, presentable condition that I could add in my collection. And so I believe it's harder to find than the chenille, but it's certainly not as valuable to national collectors because it is a silk screen neckerchief. But if you have the chance to acquire one, I would certainly acquire it if you could for your collection. It's a tough piece. So with that, I'd like to get into another item that's got a little bit of a background and story that a lot of people have not seen. And I'm going to show two of them, and this goes along with a camp one at the same time. And these are the some of the original neckerchief slides that would have been worn proudly at Camp Ononwa. And one of them is a Unilee plaster neckerchief slide, and with it, I've got the from the same era, a Camp Ononwa neckerchief slide. These, I believe, were from the late 1940s. And I based this on a little bit of information I can share with you. I had heard about this slide, and I'd heard old timers in Unilee. Now, for me, old timers were people that were active in the lodge in the 1960s or so. They remembered old timers in the lodge wearing these, particularly this. And it was, I think, around the same time as the A1, late 1940s, but it is plaster. And here is the camp patch from that was used in the late 1940s at Camp Ononwa in the same process. Now, these were not arrowheads painted by a talented artist. And let me tell you what I mean by that. They are not flat and painted. If you look at them in this direction, you can tell that they are three-dimensional. There's the outline of the deer in the circle, and the same thing for the trees, the canoe, and everything on the camp version. They're three-dimensional, and they're very, very strikingly three-dimensional, which means that without a doubt, these were made using a plaster cast, which means that there was a plaster cast made by a manufacturer somewhere. Of course, we have no idea what happened to the original plaster cast. I did talk with Doc Rabin, who many of you collectors have know or have met. He was, I think, handicraft director one year in the early 1950s, and he did not remember them. They were prior to his time. But we don't know if they were, you went and bought the casted plaster and then painted it yourself, or if someone painted a certain number of them and the lodge sold them and the camp sold them. We don't know. But I know I've heard of them. I've heard of others having this. I would love to see any others that are out there. One of the reasons they're so tough to find is they are so fragile. You can see I've got a couple of chips in the design that sadly has happened since I acquired mine about 15 years ago. So if you ever see this and have the chance to pick it up, do not pass it up. And it's about the rarest item I have in my personal Unilee collection. And with that, I'd like to get on to something that is challenging to find, but is very affordable to find when you find it. And it's something a lot of collectors have never heard of, is the Unilee Lodge first day cover. So what is a first day cover? A first day cover is something that's popular in the stamp collecting world. And that is an envelope that is specially printed, normally with a design, high quality printed with a stamp that the stamp normally has something to do with the topic of the first day cover. And it is typically mailed on the first day of issue in the stamp collecting world to an address, and you save it in your collection. That's called a first day cover. I know if there are any stamp collectors out there, you could probably describe that better than me. But in 1961, someone involved in the early organization of SOSI, Scouts on Stamps International, Society International, I believe, and they're still out there. But I know there was a Palmetto chapter in the late 1950s and early 1960s, so there were a handful of people in collecting Scout stamps during that time in South Carolina. Someone obviously was from Unilee Lodge because they designed and drew up one in honor of the 100th centennial of the first shots fired in the Civil War, which happened in Charleston. So this first day cover is really cool. It looks great in a collection, and they pop up from time to time, but typically not in Scout collections. They pop up in stamp collections. So you have to look at a different area of eBay and maybe get a little bit creative in how you search for this. But I sent you a scan to include, and it actually says cover by Unilee Lodge, O of A, Boy Scouts of America. And the example that I have, and I don't know if all of them are this way, but it's dated the April 12th, 9 a.m., 1961. So somebody went and had these stamped at the Charleston post office, and it's actually addressed and mailed to Unilee Lodge, and they're addressed on East Bay Street in Charleston. So this is a great item to put in your collection, and good luck finding it. So hopefully some people will start beating up eBay in the stamp and first day covers collection areas to find one. The next item is belt buckles. Now, I know of two different belt buckles that Unilee listed or have produced over the years, but belt buckles are challenging to find. You know, I've got a national OA collection of Lodge belt buckles, and it's taken me about 25 years to put together about 400 different ones. And belt buckles are typically cost 7 or 8 times more than a Lodge flap, sometimes even more than that. So people did not typically buy multiple belt buckles when the Lodge had them for sale. They'd rather buy Lodge patches that they could trade and get a lot more to trade. So there's not a whole lot of them out there, and when you find them, they're typically worn. But in the 1960s and possibly into the early 70s, Unilee Lodge had this belt buckle. I do not know the name of the manufacturer, but I do have other Lodge belt buckles made in the same type of bronzy brass with the same type of backing. But it's a beautiful buckle. It's got the white-tailed deer on it. I would love if any older Unilee collectors have any specific dates or information on this. I'd love to hear it. But you see these pop up from time to time, and they are rare as hen's teeth, but you can have them typically for a lot cheaper than a patch that's this rare. Certainly, I think it's possible to even find this for less than $100. So if I were from Unilee and I saw this come up, I would certainly take a chance to acquire it. It looks great in the collection. Next items that have come up, and these are extremely rare to find. I've only ever seen a couple of each, but they look great in a collection, are some t-shirts. This is what I believe to be the first Lodge t-shirt, which came out in the 1960s. You notice it's got the arrowhead design and Coastal Carolina Council on it. I think it's pretty common years ago in the 50s and 40s and 50s and 60s that people were more familiar with the council name than the Lodge name. So on t-shirts and patches, a lot of times you would see a reference to the Lodge name, but you would see the more descriptive council name, which definitely leaves no question in your mind where this council is from if you saw this worn at an early jamboree. But I believe this came out in the early to mid 1960s. And it's interesting to note that it's got, I've got other Lodge t-shirts in my collection that have the official BSA tag on it because they were made under the auspices of the Boy Scouts of America by a manufacturer. And there was a sheet that was mailed out to the councils for OA items that could be ordered, and the t-shirt was on there. And so don't know the name of the company that actually made them for the BSA, but they had the official BSA tag. Now on into the early 1970s, they came out with what I believe to be the second Lodge t-shirt. And it's this design. It is a colorful arrowhead design. And you notice that it's got a ribbed neck and whatnot. So it does more on into the 1970s, but both of these t-shirts are extremely difficult to acquire. So if you have a chance to get one, you can even fold it up and put it in a notebook. And I, with some creative folding and ironing. So when you see t-shirt, yeah.
Matt, I was going to say, that second t-shirt, what's interesting to me is that the design on the pocket, I don't recall there being a patch that has that exact same design.
That's true. Somebody drew
like an original design.
Yeah.
Although it has all the familiar elements, there's no patch that looks like that.
Yep. So I agree. I agree. It's a beautiful design. One thing I would say is it's common to find early camp and Lodge t-shirts in very small youth sizes. Yeah. And there's a couple reasons for this. You got to remember, t-shirts were not even a thing until after World War II. The first t-shirts were produced in World War II by military units, so they really didn't start coming into the scout world until late 40s and early 50s. And t-shirt manufacturers did not make them to be worn as outer garments. They made them to be worn as inner garments, which meant they were tighter fitting. So this says it's a men's XL. A men's XL back then is probably more like a men's L or even a large cut men's medium today. So one thing to keep in mind about early t-shirt manufacturers. And if you found a 2XL, that's very rare from that time frame of older t-shirts. But to find them in any condition today, especially if you're looking for one, there's still a couple from, I think, the 1970s and or so in my home lodge that I've been looking for years. And when you can find them, typically they're pretty cheap. Although one from the lodge I'm in now, Atakula, just went for $480 on eBay, one that none of us had ever seen before. So there is a demand for them. And with a little bit of ironing and creativity, you can get it in a notebook, and it looks great in there. It'll also look good folded up in the background of a frame like you have, and keep your collection in. So on into something else special that was done in the late 1960s and early 1970s are the trail medals. Unilee Lodge helped sponsor the Swamp Fox Trail in the Francis Marion Forest, and this was in the heyday of trails and trail medals and trail patches. And Unilee Lodge did not disappoint. They many months of service to build the Francis Marion Trail, called the Swamp Fox Trail. And here is the medal of the Swamp Fox Trail. But what's really cool about it is to recognize the service of Unilee Lodge. They produced some that were engraved on the back, and it says the trail was sponsored by Unilee Lodge, number 236, Order of the Era, Charleston, South Carolina. And I've been told that these medals went to the trail builders, who were members of the lodge, who all did service to build the trail. So the trail is still there today. I know I had the pleasure of hiking it prior to Hurricane Hugo with my troop in the 1980s. But the point we did in the 1980s, we didn't have patches or medals offered to us. The patches and medals may have gone out at that point in time, but the trail is still there. And today the trail is still there. The forest is beautiful again. A lot of the trees that were knocked down by Hurricane Hugo have all completely regenerated with new forest growth. And it's a beautiful trail that's now managed by the Park Service. On into another thing. This is like the first day cover. It's not that common, but if you find it, you can get it for cheap, and it's part of Unilee's history, is Scouting Memories. Scouting Memories was a book that came out in 1976 after the retirement of J. Rucker Newberry. It was written by him. It's like a loose collection of short stories about various things he remembers from scouting. But if you can pick up this book, normally you'll find it very reasonably, like $20 or less. What's really cool about it is that at the 1977 Dixie Fellowship, J. Rucker Newberry, I've been told by many people, was there with E. Erner Goodman, the founder of the OA, and both were just signing stuff left and right, and that J. Rucker Newberry had his Scouting Memories book available there. And I'm fortunate enough to have a copy that's signed by J. Rucker Newberry. So if you can find one for your collection, it's pretty cool. And it's thin enough to go inside a notebook. And one other item I want to mention is something that I do not know the story of. I just know it exists. Everyone is familiar with, or most advanced collectors are familiar with the common, well, not common, it's still a valuable item and hard to acquire, but dance team patch. And this was used in the 1980s, and I think on into possibly the early 90s. Somehow I have found a smaller version of this patch, and I do not understand the background of it. I don't know if this was a fake, if it was something that was made to trade, or if someone who was in the military overseas somewhere had someone embroider it. Those of you who may be aware that years ago, especially near Navy and Air Force bases and Army bases overseas, especially in the Far East, that there were embroidery guys outside of bases who would sew these beautiful jackets with dragons and beautiful Oriental designs, and they would sew as souvenirs and as jackets to wear and things like that. And that's a whole nother discussion, but it was relatively common to find patches that someone would take their camp patch or their OA Lodge patch overseas with them in their duffel bag, and they would have someone make some for them. So things like that do pop up from time to time. And that is a dying art. Now, the last time I was in Korea, off US base, I think I found one guy that could do that. And I don't even know how many of those people are out there anymore that can do line of sight hoop embroidery visually anymore. But this one's kind of odd. It does not have the telltale markings of Asian embroidery on the name, so it may have been computer embroidered and made to look old. But if anybody knows anything about this, or sees one, please try to pick it up. I'd love to compare it to this one, or get any information that you have. Now, there's one other item here that we do not know about, but I've seen two of these, including the one I'm about to show you, and I've heard of yet a third one, and it wouldn't surprise me if more are out there, but it's this guy. So we do not know the origin of this. They came from, the two that I know of came from National Collections, and I've heard that there's a third collector who has one, but I've not seen it yet. But it is like the S1, but the embroidery is vertical. To me, the green is a little bit darker, especially on the lettering, and there's no errors in it, so it's not a manufacturer's error. And it's just both of the two examples that I've seen are in beautiful condition, and they're obviously not something that's been made with common embroidery machines. This was Swiss embroidered. So any information that anybody has on this, I know we'd love to have it. It could have been that a handful of vertical and a handful of horizontal ones were sent to the council, and J. Rucker Newberry picked which ones and gave away the rest. I don't know. It could very well be something like that, but they're incredibly rare. So if anyone ever sees this, pick it up, and please let me see a scan of it. But an incredibly rare piece. Like I said, only a handful known to exist. And there's one more item that came out that has a little bit of story to it in the early 1990s, and is a very tough item to find. So if you ever see it, please try to acquire it. Is this little guy right here. Just says a Langemat Unilee 236. Unilee is misspelled. They used a lowercase I instead of an uppercase L in the spelling of the name. But I remember acquiring this from a collector in the parking lot at Campo Nanwa when I went down for an event there in the early 1990s. Back after I was section chief and whatnot, when I was really collecting other lodges, I would pick up things and would go to a lot of lodge events all over the state. And that's how I acquired this in the early 1990s. And it is listed on in OA Insignia, I think, and in Blue Book, but is incredibly tough to find. As I understand, and what was explained to me when I got it in the parking lot, was that the adult advisor for the Langemats at the time had them made as an item to present to Unilee Langemat. So be interesting to know how many were made, but I do know that they're incredibly hard to find. And I think you were fortunate enough to find one for your collection at one point. So right. Did you get yours in the 1990s when they were relatively new?
My memory is that I got it at a Dixie Fellowship, but I don't recall from who. Just a vague memory in my mind.
Okay, awesome. Well, that I tried to include as much background information as I know on these items. So I know that there's more information out there that'll add to this story, and I would love to hear it if anybody wants to email me. My email is real easy to remember. It's mattdelk@hotmail.com, mattdelk@hotmail.com. So any information anybody has, I'm all ears. So, well, Jason, I think that pretty well covered some special items to be on the lookout for Unilee.
Absolutely. And just to let people know, Matt and I talked about filming similar videos for other lodges that are kind of in that Carolina OA world. We personally collect the lodges that you would say now are in SR5 because we both grew up in SR5 lodges. And back in the day, as Matt mentioned, both of us ended up being section chiefs. And so we are grounded in there. So if you have ideas for videos that you'd like to see, certain topics in this area, just as Matt Delk shared his email there, go on there. You can leave a comment on the YouTube video or a comment on the website and just let us know what you'd like to see. But we're going to try to maybe push out one of these every couple of weeks and just really try to share our knowledge. You know, so much of what we've learned about these items was from older scouters telling us, you know, the stories like you mentioned with the plaster slide. And so, you know, we're trying to pass this information on to the next generation of collectors and scouters so they'll know what the story is. You know, you're kind of in this day and age, you have the benefit of the internet where a lot of this information, if you dug far enough, you could find it. But I think an example in this video is that many of those items are really undocumented. They're not in the blue book. They're not on any website that I know of. So hopefully this gives people some new knowledge. So Matt, you want to just, I'll hand it back to you and let you close out this video.
Hey, this was a lot of fun digging through, and I can tell you, a lot of people just collect what's on the checklist or what they may know about, but it's really fun and exciting to find something interesting like this that you don't know about. And these things pop up from time to time, and I'm still keeping an eye out for things like old newsletters and things like that. So don't throw that stuff away. Keep yourself a special box, especially for your home lodge, and save some of this stuff. It's going to be really interesting to somebody one day. So thanks,
All right.
Jason.